This, Triple H, you are to The Rock a one-trick pony and a cheap trick circus. Your one trick is China, and your cheap circus is your ability, period. Now on to you, badass Billy Gunn, Mr. Ass. The Rock says this. He's going to take them little lips you got on your trunks, take them off, lip by lip, turn them sideways, and stick them straight up your candy ass. Now, speaking of lips, on to you, China. The Rock sees the way you lick your lips, the way you pucker your lips. Every time The Rock comes around, you obviously got a fetish for The Rock, and you suffer from rock fever. The Rock says this, next time you go one-on-one with the Great One, instead of nailing The Rock in the people's jewels, he wants you to get down on your knees. Uh-oh. Don't get excited, China. No, don't get excited. Not yet. He wants you to pucker your lips like this. And when you do that, The Rock will come in, he'll pucker his lips too. Close your eyes and get ready to feel The Rock's electricity. Then The Rock will bring his lips about an inch from yours, step back, look at you, take his boot, kick your teeth so far down your throat, you'll stick a toothbrush straight up your ass to brush them.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 11 of the Pseudo Nerd Podcast for March 18th, 2016. I'm your podcast host, Josh Kiser, and joining me today, reigning from, Amherst, Lorain, Ohio, I don't know where you're born, weighing in at about 165 pounds, Josh Haddix.
I was actually born in Pennsylvania, so... But
that's cool.
Okay.
And now residing in San Francisco, California, the man that gravity wished he could forget. It's a fat joke. Kyle Hoagland.
Oh, what's going on, everybody?
I fully expected a weighing in at like 350 pounds comment for Hougie.
Yeah, I went more clever.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm not saying you weigh that much, Hougie.
Yeah,
but it was a joke.
By the way, I just want to say one thing real quick about. So at the beginning of the podcast, there's always like a clip, and then it's the theme, and then Kiser, welcomes everybody. I don't know why it just felt like that was like 5 minutes long. Like Haddix, you could have peed like 8 times during that time.
It was definitely probably the longest clip we've had thus far.
The LeBron Bill Hader one was quite long as well.
That was a good one, though. I like that. I haven't heard this one, so this could be a good one as well. But I like
The Rock, so I'm assuming by default you don't like it.
You guys don't.
Well, in that case, I've heard it before, but just not now.
And for our audience,
I only know that because Kiser said it was The Rock. Like I said, we don't actually hear it. We have no idea what it is other than Kiser in particular.
Right. I actually, to believe it or not, I spend some time trying to find a good opening clip for our segments. And it's usually one I got to find on YouTube, which sometimes for copyright purposes and things like that, it's not easy to find an appropriate clip. And I don't want it to be boring, so I try to find an entertaining clip of some sort that also has good audio quality. And given that I wanted something from the Attitude Era, which is going to be part of the theme of today's podcast, it's really hard to find anything on YouTube that isn't either copyrighted by WWE or was uploaded from like someone's Betamax when they recorded a Monday Night Raw from 1997.
Well, I don't think our podcast has enough traction where even if we were to play a clip of a Raw that obviously has a copyright, I don't know if we're going to go to jail yet, but I'm sure. I guess
no. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying like they don't have that shit out there for you like readily available. They take it all down.
Does it have to be a YouTube? Like, could you have gone onto the WWE Network and done something, or is that too long of like?
I might have been able to do the WWE Network, but it would have taken a little more time, and I don't know exactly how I would have ripped it. I would have had to look at some stuff and try to figure it out.
Yeah, I'm with you.
So it's just much easier to just rip a quick YouTube file.
Word.
So that said, we're at episode 11 now. If you guys listened to the wrestling podcast last week and you're still with us, we appreciate that. We didn't hear any feedback, negative or positive. on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or YouTube or any of that. So we don't know whether you guys hated or loved last week's podcast. But we'd love to hear it this week. So feel free to follow us on all those platforms. You can go to the pseudonerdpod.com and find all that, as well as some blog posts that Hoagie's been diligently working at.
I'll have one up probably tomorrow in regards to more Attitude Era-y post.
Yeah, and so that's what we're talking about. We sort of brushed upon the Attitude Era last week with the podcast, but we really wanted to hold off till this week because it is the golden age of wrestling. I don't think it'll ever be topped. I don't think anything will come close to it when it comes to how just a cultural phenomena it was at the time. And we'll just compare it to where wrestling is these days, and kind of talk about both the past, the present, and what we like about both, what we hated about both, and all the in-betweens.
And of course, us being at our age, there could be people right now, who knows, that like the current product right now, who might have been younger or older than us during the Attitude Era. I just feel like it was the perfect time in our ages to like really be into wrestling, and that's also the reason why I think the fans now are so polarized, because we're now using our own money to like devote ourselves to what we're a fan of. So it's a crowd now at this point that's hard to please.
It's like the ladies I've been with, you know what I'm saying?
We can bring your dirty laundry out right now, but we won't.
Well, sex jokes, vulgarity, cursing, violence, those are just a few of the things that really defined the Attitude Era.
I think what really did was smashing guitars. I feel like every Monday night, Jeff Jarrett had to smash a guitar on somebody. That hurt more than chairs. Like, honestly, that looked like that hurt more than like any chair shot in that era.
I don't know. Talk to Chris Benoit about a chair shot, all right?
Well, you can't talk to him.
You really can't. So. He lost a fight to a Bowflex.
R.I.P.
There's been some debate. We were actually discussing this as we prepped for the show this week about when the Attitude Era started. And I want to get your guys' opinion. When do you think the Attitude Era began?
Who are you asking?
Either one of you, just fucking talk.
I'll let, for what it's worth, I'll let Hougie answer it. Like I stated last week, I kind of came in to the whole wrestling thing and became a huge fan. It might have been at the beginning of the actual Attitude Era, but it had already started. I shouldn't say I wasn't a big fan. I just never watched it before that. So I can't personally give an example of when it started. So I'll let Hougie go ahead and take that one.
So the time I thought that it made sense for it to happen, as far as like an official date, I'm sure there were things that happened before this date I'm going to give that, the wheel was already starting to, to spin with the idea of being edgier and Christianer and all that stuff.
This guy recycling his jokes from last week.
I only got one joke. We'll keep going. I got a whole month. But in December, I think it was like mid-December of 1997 was when Vince McMahon actually came on USA television as kind of like a little bit of like a promo before the show started. And I think we talked about it a bit in the podcast episode before this one, where he was basically talking about, the age of, the comic book hero and the, saying your prayers and take your vitamins is passé. And
which also was a complete dig at Hogan at the time.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, it definitely was. I mean, that's how you get people to pay attention when if you're going to talk, call out somebody. And then, but he also said something which I also mentioned last week was he said, I feel like the fans of wrestling are sick and tired of their intelligence being insulted, which once again is the whole, having Duke the Dumpster Drosy and, Isaac Yankem and Doink the Clown, all a bunch of characters, but they aren't real. They aren't like people that, like at this point, a lot of the stars are people like Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart, and then WCW it's Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. They're using their real names, or at least in our eyes, it's, Shawn Michaels, that's not his real name, but it's a name. It's not like he was being known as...
It is a name, that's factually correct.
Thank you very much. So for me, the beginning had to be when I feel like he's the one that actually announced that from here on out, with USA's backing and Titan Sports backing, that this is the direction they're going to go. They feel that this is the right way to go. So to me, that's the beginning.
And that's fair. I'm not gonna refute that too much. I definitely think, to your point, that was really when things started heading in that direction. And I didn't really start watching until post WrestleMania. What was that, 14? When Austin beat Michaels. And that, to me, sort of became the Attitude Era. And I think that's partly just because that's when I started watching it, was shortly thereafter. So it just sticks in my mind as like, well, I started watching it then, so I pretty much defined the Attitude Era.
Well, I think they were also already putting the Attitude word on like their emblems and logos even before that WrestleMania as well. Like the word attitude was, I think, was used in November, like right around Survivor Series, I believe. During the Montreal Screwjob, I think right after that they started putting, they started using the word attitude a lot.
The Screwjob sort of changing the landscape of that, because I think that before then Vince McMahon really wasn't much of a character. He was still just commentary.
I think, well, even when he was doing commentary, though, I said you weren't watching really then, but I know that we've watched enough of the WWE Network. I feel like we've caught up on it, on what we've been talking, as far as the history. And he was definitely getting more involved. He was doing commentary, but, Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels would always walk over to the table and like give him glares or shove him. So he was definitely getting involved, because I think people knew that he wasn't just an announcer. He definitely was in charge. And so, and he was himself inserted.
I think it was still, I still think a little bit after that, before he became known as like more than just an announcer. But it started happening at that point with the screw job and things like that. But enough about that. What do you guys associate with the Attitude Era? Haddix, what is the Attitude Era to you?
Dude, it was great television. I mean, whether you like the wrestling, the actual in-ring wrestling part of the WWE, or you like the storylines, it was great wrestling all around. The matches themselves told a great story. I don't hate to use this word, but they use this word a lot in wrestling lingo. But the psychology of the matches were really good. The storylines are really good because they were doing some very intense things, whether sexual or violent. It was just great TV. The personalities, I mean, the Stone Colds, the Rocks, the Undertakers, such great personalities, such great storylines. I mean, it was, whether you liked wrestling or not, it was great TV.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that really shined with to your point about great TV is there were storylines for everybody. And you can say, oh yeah, there's storylines for everybody now, but it was different. Everybody on that show wanted to go out there and steal the show. Whether you were the first match of the night, the fifth match of the night, the main event, you just had a backstage 2-minute promo, you had a little interview with Michael Cole, or there's just a little vignette that they shot to promote your team or you or your stable or whatever the case may be. Like, there was always something there, and everything was, you were interested as a fan in all of it. Like, whether it was, Funaki's match, or it was, Austin versus, The Rock or something like that. Like, you wanted to know everything that was going on. And it was just top to bottom, great stories in and out, great television in and out every week. It wasn't like, well, this week's Raw sucked. And part of the reason for that, and Kyle, you can kind of elaborate with me on this, is they were worried. Everyone was there knowing they're fighting for a job, because WCW we talk about the Attitude Era and we refer to it mainly as, this is the WWE, this is the Attitude Era with them. But WCW was kicking ass in the ratings war, and they're pushing the boundaries over there, and they're really trying to get the other, knock out the competition, bankrupt the other company, things like that. So that competition really helped push the Attitude Era to where it was.
Yeah, there's no competition anymore. But yeah, back then, Ted Turner and his money were buying anybody that was worth a damn in the WWE. Like Hogan and Savage. And once again, this was years before. But then he was taking people like Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, and he was even taking just. He took like Mean Gene Okerlund just for the shits of it. He didn't need him, but like the whole reason why the Attitude Era was great was because it had to happen. It was built out of desperation. So you have a bunch of guys, like you said, who are they understand that they were just a couple weeks of bad ratings away from basically calling Eric Bischoff asking for a job at WCW, and it made sense to go to WCW. God damn, I sound like Porky Pig. In WCW, they're giving away.
I'm not going to touch that one.
I was laughing too.
They were giving away like guaranteed contracts, which would never existed in professional wrestling. You got paid at the end of the day. Whatever Vince felt like you did. If you did well, you got money. If you did shitty, he felt you deserved less. That's how it basically always was in that business. So then you're signing like people to like 2-year guaranteed money contracts in WCW. You got to feed your family. It made sense for these guys to leave and go to there. And also at WCW, they weren't required to be on TV as much as these other guys. The guys in WWE are trying to get on TV as much as humanly possible to get noticed and to bring the brand up and to keep their jobs. Whereas the other guys in WCW, they don't even need to be on television. Like a lot of those guys had contracts where they had an X amount of obligations to be on TV, and once they hit them, they could be off TV for 3 months and still get all the money they needed.
Right, and that was part of the downfall of WCW, but that's another conversation for another day. But you bring up a good point. I mean, that's those guaranteed contracts, having those, they didn't care as much. Where meanwhile, these people over at WWF at the time were fighting for the company's survival, so they wanted to go out there and give it their all every time. And you saw that in the matches, you saw that in their promos and things like that. And they were willing, whatever they could do to get ratings, they were willing to do it. And that's where you'd have The Rock come out and Austin come out. Austin McMahon was one of the biggest feuds, and it's basically they're trying to appeal to the audience of this. You hate your boss, and you're going to go out there every week and torment the living hell out of them. And they cussed, and they get these women coming out parading around in their bra and panties, and it was a teenage boy's dream.
It was shock value. Both of the shows, Nitro and Raw, are basically on at the same time. Nitro started an hour before. So the other important thing was on WCW side, they were about match quality. I think the matches overall were better in WCW, whereas WWE, they did like 5-minute matches. They were very short, but once again, like you said before, they were hitting more of the vignettes, the promos, the story, the shock value, the sexiness. They were doing everything they could to get you to change the channel and watch. Because like once it becomes a point where you feel like, okay, I can either watch WCW or WW or either watch Nitro or Raw. Well, which one is going to be can't miss television? And honestly, during the Attitude Era, it was Raw. You can watch a match with Hooven Dude versus Rey Mysterio, and as great of a match as it could be, you'd rather see if Austin gives McMahon the stunner and gives everybody stunners. And
spoiler alert, he does.
Yeah, plenty of times. And also Vince couldn't take a stunner. I've seen so many videos of that guy taking a stunner. He never took that gracefully.
Did you ever see Linda McMahon take a stunner? That's a YouTube video worth watching.
Dude, that's the worst stunner ever taken.
It's horrible. The Rock and Shane McMahon, they could take stunners.
Dude, The Rock can take a stunner like a fucking champ.
It's to the point where he almost oversells him. That dude's like doing like a floor gymnast routine when he gets.
I did see the due to the fact that when we're recording this, it is actually Steve Austin Day or Stone Cold Steve Austin Day.
Dude, you're giving away, dude. Come on now, everyone knows that we do this live on Fridays.
Right? Yeah. I mean, when you're downloading us at 4 a.m. on a Friday morning, we just got finished with a fucking stellar.
We wake up and start talking the moment you start playing.
So anyway, it was a GIF, if you will, of him stunning Triple H, and then like he pops back up and is like staggering around, and then they throw him a beer in the ring, and he cracks one open and then stuns him again because he's like walking around. It was pretty badass. So Triple H can take some stunners too.
He can. But so Haddix, let me ask you, what do you think the Attitude Era did right that maybe the current product is not doing?
Well, I mean, whether it's because it was edgier or they could push the envelope a little bit more, I guess that's a separate debate. But you were so much more involved in the characters. It's like you said earlier, not necessarily every match, but basically every match, especially at a big pay-per-view like a WrestleMania. You would be interested in every single one. Maybe not the whole match, but at least how it ended. Just because there was a storyline that was going on that involved those people. For instance, there was just a pay-per-view. Was that last Saturday? Roadblock? Was that last Saturday?
I'm not even calling it a pay-per-view, but...
whatever you want to call it. Whatever you want to call it. It was on Saturday. Yeah, it was on Saturday night. There were some matches. There was some matches on there that they just... You had no idea why they were even fighting each other. Even the match was good. Let's say the wrestling was good, but you're not involved. Who cares who beats who if there's no storyline? Like you're not invested.
Yeah, there's no payoff. There's no build up. There's
like
just...
who cares if he hits him with a chair and cheats and all that? Like you don't give a shit, But back in the Attitude Era, there was such good storylines in the tag team matches, even in the women's matches, even though they weren't as great. There was still some stuff going on there, so you'd be invested. It was just good storytelling. So even if the matches were a little bit shorter than they are now, they were long enough to keep you intrigued, but then the stories were what really brought you in.
Hougie, how about you? What do you think they did right that maybe the current product isn't doing?
The new product now seems like Nitro now, or Nitro then. It's a big company now with a backing of a lot of money, and like you said last week, investors, and you got kind of you're walking on eggshells. You don't want to go back to have to talk to Congress again, which Vince has done a couple times. So it's kind of like you have to play nice. So what happens is when you lose the ability to have the shock value, then you have to rely on the product itself, your wrestlers, the ability to perform, which was never a problem. Even back in the Attitude Era, even back in the even in the Attitude Era, obviously there were great wrestlers during that time, amazing wrestlers, probably some of the best we've ever had. But the talent now I think talent-wise is just as good. In some cases, it's even better. But what happens is that the matches become very, what's the word? God damn it! Whenever I think ahead so much and I can't, they're very predictable. I feel like there's no way
whatever happened to predictability.
The Milkman and the Paperboy in evening TV. Hex, you wouldn't know that because you weren't on that podcast. So, but they're too predictable now. I think the last couple of times I remember watching pay-per-views with you, Kiser, I think we pretty much guessed the ending of almost every match, and so that's not intriguing. And so the writing obviously is not quite there anymore. And then what Haddix was saying was there's not enough feuds. There's not everybody back then had a reason to be on television and wrestle. Like there was a reason. It wasn't just to go on and perform. They were going out there because they had some sort of feud with somebody and it was just continuing like everybody did. Now it just seems like it's just, for the title, right for the world title, and maybe like something that John Cena's doing. But other than that, you don't have,
It's not top to bottom.
Yeah, it's either the writing is poor or you just don't have enough guys on the roster now that truly want to take that next step. Like they're happy to have the job they have right now, and they don't want to commit career suicide. Whereas back in 97, 98, 99, everybody was potentially committing career suicide, and they were basically dancing on that
cliff.
Some
of them were just committing suicide.
I mean, come on, that's ruthless aggression. That's a different time. But that's to me is the real difference, is that nobody has that confidence, or people. I think people are too scared as far as the writing and the talent to get in trouble.
Right. Well, and they're much more scripted now. We'll kind of talk about that in a minute. I just want to throw one more factor in about the Attitude Era before we move on to the current product. And for me, the one I was just watching while I was going through those YouTube clips trying to find a good opening. The one thing that kept sticking out to me, well, two things, and they kind of go hand in hand to a degree. The biggest things I noticed was, one, the crowds were absolutely insane back then. Every week it was, a full-on, sold out, just nuts crowds. There's signs from wall to wall. Everybody's bringing in signs. It's just total chaos. And it really helps electrify the entire production. And then the other thing that really stands out for me is the commentary. JR and the King are phenomenal together. And in the Attitude Era, they define the matches. Some of those calls stick with you to today. Now, that said, you listen to Michael Cole, Byron Saxton, and JBL, and it's awful. It is terrible. They put you to sleep. They're talking mostly about Twitter, and they're doing more social media whoring than we do when we open these podcasts up. And
we learn from the best.
That's right. And it does not intrigue you. They don't know how to tell a good story. And part of that too is they're scripted to say certain things. Vince is in their ear, where before JR and King were pretty much had free reign, much like the rest of the roster, to say and do what they wanted, and it made for a much more interesting product.
Dude, in your defense, because it's Stone Cold Day or whatever, there's been a lot of videos. Man, there's some crazy pops when Stone Cold when his music would hit, like at the end of a match that he wasn't in or something. Like, you listen to some of those, and it's like,
oh, it's insane.
It gives you goosebumps just watching it all these years later. Like, just the whole crowd stands up and goes nuts, and
all you can hear was the glass shattering, and then it's like his music is just muffled.
You don't even hear the music, right?
Right.
It's just total nuts, and that's it's you don't see that anymore. Every once in a while you'll hear it, and that said, even like when The Rock or Austin make a surprise appearance, they get a good pop, but it still does not compare to how the old crowds were.
Well, I feel like it's not. It never happens like in the midst of another match. Like the video I watched today, it was The Rock versus Mankind, and I think it was when The Rock was in what was it, the Corporation or whatever?
Is that when he lost the title to Mankind?
Yeah, and the clip started late because it was on Twitter, but I think McMahon and all of them had interfered, and so you think Mankind's going to lose, and then all of a sudden, so the crowd's pissed. And then all of a sudden, the glass hits, and the crowd goes nuts. He goes out there and hits The Rock with a chair. And
see, that's the difference between the product now and the product then. The product now doesn't have a guy who comes out and, like, remember when Sting came in and like saved Survivor Series and Ziggler won? That brought such a huge reaction. Like, that doesn't happen enough, it seems like. Obviously you can't overdo it, but that's what's happening now, is that there's interference that we're all like, God damn it, don't let it end this way, and it does. That's how it ends, and everybody kind of like leaves with a sour taste in their mouth. So we need more of like where we get so angry and down, like, oh God, please don't let it end this way, and then like our savior comes in the form of Austin or like more recently Sting to turn the tides and let it end honestly the way it should end, which is the way we want it to end. Because in the end, that's how you have a happy fan base. Is you got to make them happy. We kind of want what we want.
This is true. And to the point, Haddix, that particular match, that was a preempted Raw, so it was a recorded Raw. And during the Monday Night Wars, where both sides were, trying to push the limit, Eric Bischoff had them read the results of Raw that week, and they kind of ended with, and Mick Foley wins the world title. And Hougie, what's the famous line?
Well, that'll put butts in the seats. Ugh.
And turns out that pretty much everybody flipped over from Nitro to Raw, and that
honestly was one of the turning points, really, of the ratings too. Yeah. I think after that happened, I don't think they ever lost again.
That's another thing, though, is how many times does the title change hands on Monday Night Raw these days?
Never. I mean,
yeah. I mean, not that it did all the time.
Hardly ever
back
world
then.
title defenses.
Yeah, I mean, not that it did all the time in the Attitude Era either, but it was a possibility. It made you want to watch because you never knew what was going to happen.
Well, they did a lot during that time too, though, because they did care about the ratings. WCW cared too much about it. Like they had the two times where they had the highest ratings. It was always like main events that needed to be on a pay-per-view. Like it was
the Hogan
it was great
Goldberg match. They drew a huge rating for it. It was a massive crowd. It's actually a very good match and like a very good crowd and everything. And it was wasted on a Monday Nitro.
And that was one of the reasons why Austin had he quit when Brock Lesnar came over, because they wanted him to have a match where he was going to job to Lesnar on Raw. And one of the reasons why, I'm sure also he didn't want to lose to Lesnar, who was kind of new to the business, but he felt like it would make way more sense and make way more money for everybody, including himself, to put that on pay-per-view. And they didn't want to do it that way, and he went back to Victoria, Texas, to his ranch, and he didn't come back for a while.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that and kind of what it took for him to finally make amends. But let's talk about the current product now. It's obviously much more different. It's sort of a PG-rated show. There's very little to no sex, very little to no cursing. The blood and violence is almost not there. They kind of use fake blood from time to time if they really need to push their agenda. And then, part of that's because they're publicly traded now. They have to maintain a certain image. They don't have this, 6 or 7 million viewers a week kind of thing, so they really don't have the same pool that they used to with the networks. And, there's no competition either. So they're sitting here with a PG-rated show that, isn't pushing the limits.
Which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. They're still doing 8 to 11, which to me still, I feel like they should be able to get away with doing some things risque. It'd be one thing if they moved to like 5 to 8, where it's right after dinner and the kids are still up and things like that. But it's late. It's still to me considered late programming. There's shows that I think that kids watch to this day. Like it's less risque than like Law and Order or things like that, and I don't think anybody's ever really judged Law and Order and how some of the topics or some of the storylines they do there can
actually, I think
push the
judges judge Law and Order all the time. I think it's actually their job.
Haddix, you take over, man. I'm done. I'm gonna get out my Stevie Weiser.
So the characters now too is they're kind of homegrown. And I say that, but a lot of they'll sign people in from Ring of Honor and New Japan and things like that, and bring them in. Whereas before, you saw a lot of WCW, WWF, and ECW characters sort of just floating from business to business as they pleased or as they were bought. So they have NXT now, which is sort of the minor league system, and it's a great place really for them to develop and hone their skills, but characters don't have as much surprise entrances like they did in the past, where like all of a sudden a guy from WCW shows up on Raw or a guy from Raw shows up on Nitro, that kind of thing. But I think one of the biggest problems with the current product is, yes, it's PG rated. Yes, it's gonna be less adult oriented. They're not going to have the sex and the hardcore violence, stuff like that, which can be fine, but the storytelling is so weak. And part of that is because they have this agenda where they're trying to find the next Stone Cold Steve Austin. They're trying to find the next The Rock or the Hulk Hogan of this era. And in the process, they, instead of just letting it naturally happen that way, they're trying to force, in this case, Roman Reigns, but they're trying to force that character to the fans instead of letting the fans naturally choose who they love, to your point, Kyle, earlier about, let's give it to the person, let's cheer for the person we want to cheer, and let's let the fans sort of decide who they want as champion, who they want winning these matches, how they want this to play out, instead of just forcing these storylines that really just kind of turn the fan base away.
And it's not always – I can't blame WWE all the time about that too, because some of the guys that we really wanted to to do well, I think one of the reasons why they don't get the push that we all think they deserve is I think they know a little bit more than we do. And I know, Haddix, you had mentioned this off the air about the injuries now are a lot more often, it seems. Or at least I wouldn't even say it's more often. I think that they focus more on it than they did 20 years ago or 15 years ago, where somebody had a concussion, you just kind of kept it to yourself and you just kept wrestling. Whereas now, a guy like Daniel Bryan who's had a couple of concussions, I think one of the reasons why he stopped getting pushed for a while, even before he was getting the title, was because of his health history. Dolph Ziggler is the same way, and Cody Rhodes is the same way. Like, these are guys who have had history with head injuries, and when you have something like Chris Benoit happen, where it's like concussions plus, painkillers plus steroids, you create somebody who's capable of, murdering his wife and his autistic son. So you don't want that to ever happen again. So, you kind of take side of caution, and it sucks for us, but you can't always blame the writing. But it's just a shame because every time I think they want to create a good storyline, somebody gets hurt and they have to throw something in, like Triple H now with the title. I think if everyone's healthy, I don't think that storyline happens.
But you're still having Roman Reigns forced down your throat to win that title, even if it's not Triple H he's fighting.
No, I get that too. And the Rock had the same problem at the very beginning, where they were forcing it down our throats, and Die Rocky Die happened, and then it naturally happened where we started liking him because he was no longer getting that kind of push, and instead he was actually winning the favor of us on his own, and that's what we wanted.
They hated him because they're trying to force him to be the next big thing, and he wasn't. So they put him in the Nation and kind of made him this heel. And over time, it worked, and he developed into it. They're not taking that approach with Roman Reigns. They're saying, "Hey, this is the guy we want, and you guys are gonna cheer him on." And everyone's like, "Well, no, we like this other guy or this guy." And they're like, "Well, no, you're gonna want Roman Reigns, and you're gonna like it." And it leaves a bad taste in people's mouth.
Yeah, I have hopes that at WrestleMania or soon thereafter that they'll finally, when people hate someone so much, why not turn them heel? You know what I mean? Why not do it? It would make the most sense. And I think it ties into a comparison between Attitude Era and now. And I can't take credit for this. I as you two know, because I talk about it all the time, I listen to the Stone Cold podcast, and he talks about how scripted it is now compared to back then. Back then, a guy would cut a promo, and you would just listen to it. If a guy was cutting a promo talking about Stone Cold, he would just listen to it and then respond organically. If the promo pissed him off, he'd respond in a pissed off way. It wasn't, "Hey, this guy's going to say this, you come back and say this," so it sounds like you're just reading something off of the card. It was an organic response to what this guy was saying, and I think people could tell the difference between those, and I think that's why people hate Roman Reigns, because nothing he says sounds real. It sounds like he's
basically memorized a script, or he's reading cue cards off there, and that's and yes, and to his credit and everybody else's credit now, that's sort of the nature of the business these days, which hurts them. They don't have that freedom. The only people that have that freedom, when The Rock shows up, he can do what he wants on there. When Austin shows up, he can do what he wants on there. They can say and do as they please. And Vince, I personally
think Cena has that. I think Cena has the same thing because I think Cena was around during a time too. I mean, he came
There's
in
some
like in
trust there with
2003.
Cena.
There's trust with him where I'm not. It's not even that he's going to say anything like risque right now. I mean, he used to. He used to say a lot of questionable things, like when he was the U.S. champ back in '05. But he's been injured now for a while, and it's hard to swallow saying what I'm going to say, but I kind of miss him just because he honestly
Is more
was at least
interesting than some of the other people.
he's
that are
way
there.
more interesting. He's the most charismatic guy on the card, and by far. But the only reason why people don't like him, it's not the fact that he can't wrestle. He can't, but he's good enough. I never expected him to be like a Bret Hart or a Shawn Michaels in terms of like wrestling. But as far as being on the mic, I think he's a top 5 guy all time. So,
Well, I don't know about that, but
I
that's a
mean,
debate for another time.
sure, but once again, he's good enough in wrestling and on the mic and all those intangibles that he can be a top guy without shoving it down our throats. But it's because for a long time all we had was just a big pile of John Cena for 8 years. After a while, it's not that we're sick of Cena; it's more like we're sick of not seeing other people get that same treatment.
Right. No, I agree with that, and that's because they have this. Vince has this idea in his head, and even at his, how old is he these days? In his 70s somewhere, that he is still able to do things that he's not. That he's still hip. He still knows what people want, and it's his way or the highway. So, he wants Roman Reigns. That's what you guys are going to get because he's trying to find the next John Cena, and he thinks that Reigns is it because he likes his build, this and that. He doesn't care that all the fans really are pulling for this, smaller guy who might be scraggly or, whatever. He's not the good-looking buff Samoan, and that's fans don't like that.
And you're I think you're even more towards Daniel Bryan, right?
Well, yeah, he's sticks in my mind. I think Dean Ambrose could be a top babyface right now, but they won't let him.
And I think they will. I think that's a matter of time. But for Daniel Bryan, I think the reason why everyone liked him so much is because he was in the industry for actually quite a long time. He's kind of like a Kevin Owens, where he was, as far as the indie wrestling fans, the hipster wrestling fans who were watching things like Ring of Honor and CZW and those smaller companies, where he was basically kind of like a mercenary, where he would freelance in those places and he became popular there. So when he finally made it to NXT, everybody was such a huge fan and really wanted good things to happen with him. And all it was is felt like that he just hit a speed bump after speed bump, which creates a good storyline in both, in the wrestling world and the real world, because it is real that they really aren't really giving him that shot yet because they don't think he's going to, sell out stadiums. But honestly, he would, and he did.
Yeah, absolutely. Haddix, what do you think the current product, as we sit here and bash it, what have they done that's better, or what have they done right? What do they have going for it that maybe wasn't the case in the Attitude Era?
I do think that, and we've talked off air about this a lot. I mean, we talk about wrestling a lot. I do think the matches, I don't even want to say are better. I think the
I'll say
wrestling,
they are.
well, and I think it's because this kind of plays into the injuries. I think, but they're more. They're not as technical. Like I feel like in the Attitude Era and years prior to that, you'd go in, you do a few holds, you do a couple holds. If a guy had like a bum knee, you would like put all these holds on him. You do all this kind of stuff. It wasn't this high flying wrestling. There were, don't get me wrong, there were some matches that were real crazy.
It's more athletic now. You're saying?
Yeah, it's definitely, and I think that's what leads to more injuries. I think as a fan base, since the storylines aren't as good, and all the other problems we've talked about, they've leaned more on the wrestling matches themselves have to be very entertaining. A lot of bumps being taken, a lot of people doing, I don't want to use the word crazy because I don't necessarily think it's that every match, but more high flying, more entertaining things to make up for the lack of story or emotions that are involved in a match. So now you're sitting there watching, cheering and booing for crazy things happening instead of for the guy that you want to win winning, if that makes any sense. So
yeah, I know what you're saying. Go ahead.
I think the wrestling aspect of the WWE now is better or more entertaining than it used to be.
Okay.
I guess is a good
it
is a good pro for what's going on now.
Then it hurts when the people who are trying as hard as they can are people that honestly we're not interested in. So you have a choice of either having people in the ring that are going to give you a 5-minute match that might be a little bit forgettable, but has an unforgettable ending with two wrestlers that you're actually invested in, versus two guys that are more talented in the ring, but they're two people that I really could give a shit who wins.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's a fault of the wrestlers. I think it's a fault of the writing. I
agree.
think that, back in the Attitude Era, as we were saying, like, they'd write a story that might go on for, it could be the Big Boss Man and Al Snow, and it's like a small, there's no title on the line, but the two of them are having this feud that goes on for 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks. And it's a story that's been building and building. Now they'll do a story, and it'll be two guys, and the one guy, Wrestler A, I'll just throw out two random names. Let's say Jack Swagger turns on Alberto Del Rio, and so, okay, you're like, okay, there's going to be a feud between those two. The next week they have a match, Alberto Del Rio, let's say, wins, and then they write it off, and, like, that's it. It's 1 week later, there's really no payoff, there's no build-up, and they go on with something else. Or, like, all of a sudden they're like, the Big Show is, hey, everyone, the Big Show's a real tough guy to fight. He kicks somebody's ass this week, and he destroys the announcer's table and throws chairs around and looks like this tough son of a bitch. And then 1 week later they're not even talking about it, and he's just lost a match to Ryback because they needed Ryback to win a match that week. And it just kills any momentum that they build from week in and week out. And it just, there's something lost there in the writing, that they have the talent, they have that roster's. If you put those guys back in the Attitude Era, they would do great when it comes to the in-ring, action and that kind of thing. If they had a good writing staff that would, write something worth watching, and they can make the product much more interesting, even at a PG-rated, storyline. They just don't build stories like they used to.
Yeah. The talent is there, the personalities are not there. That's the difference.
I agree with you on that, but I think they're not letting the personality shine enough.
Well, that's and however you want to, whether it's writing, booking, the talent themselves not going out on a limb, however you want to word it.
I think it's
that's
faith
the
in
issue.
Talent. I think nobody in there has faith in any of those. I think all of them want to do it, but I think they have something fed into their brains that, if it doesn't work, you're basically going to be an undercarder for the rest of your career.
Yeah.
So why do that? It's one of those things where you can be a mid carder all the time with a couple pushes here and there, or if you really mess up, then you become Stardust. That's how I've been kind of comparing it to, where Cody Rhodes had a lot of great things going for him, and then I just feel like I don't know what the hell. And the sad thing is, and I know we've talked about this off the air, Stardust is actually kind of a cool character. I think
Stardust actually started out really well, and I think the feud with him and Goldust was building up to be awesome, and then they fucking killed it.
They killed it. So yeah, it's really unfortunate. Also one of the big differences between now and then is when you're talking about the injuries. Back then, you had no risk of injury really, except for like one big bump. So you had basically you kind of rolled the dice with falling off the top rope into a table, something bad might happen and you might, tear an ACL or, you land a little awkwardly. I feel like now it's a lot of medium bumps where most of the time that probably won't hurt or it won't cause any significant damage. But then next thing you know, someone got his nose broken like Roman Reigns, or someone, lands wrong on a back body drop and nails the back of his head like Cody Rhodes. Just little things like that kind of take its toll to. That's the reason why, there's more. Maybe they're not as tough. I don't know, man. It's so weird.
Here's my thing, because I've been kind of quiet on the injury discussion that you guys have been going with. I think the injuries are the same as they were back then. I just think they have to report them now, and they have much more. There's more liability now. It's just like the NFL. 10 years ago, nobody was reporting concussions. Everybody was playing through everything, and now they can't because of regulations, because of these concussion studies, and they're just, whether it's a union thing or just
it's a drug
whatever
policy
laws
thing
and things
too.
like that. They're not allowed. These guys would go out there. Dolph Ziggler's been through 2 or 3 concussions. If he was in the Attitude Era, you would never have heard about a single one of them. He never would have missed any time. And the same can be said for anybody. If they broke a nose, they're out there fighting. Like, they fucking put it right back into place. They didn't stop matches for blood. They didn't stop matches if people got hurt. Owen Hart broke his Austin got his neck broken.
He broke his life.
And, finished the match in a matter of speaking. But you don't see that anymore. Yeah, but they don't do that. And don't get me wrong, I don't think that's a bad thing, but I'm just saying, like, I think injuries are definitely more noticed now, partly because of social media, but then also because of the way they have to report them.
Oh yeah, and I'll agree with that. And you could even throw in the fact that if you got an injury in the Attitude Era, you might not keep your job because they'd have to write in a new storyline because, again, you got to keep the ratings up. Nowadays, there's no competition. You get hurt.
There's no storyline,
sit out. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You sit out a few months, you're coming back. It's there's no competition to do anything with. So why not? Who gives a shit? So
right.
Yeah, you're making the decision. It's a good decision to make sure that your workers are safe. But you're sacrificing gripping and interesting television, which, once again, it's the right choice, as far as ethically. But, we want blood.
All right, well, as we kind of wind things down, wrap it up here, Haddix. We've discussed the Attitude Era. We've discussed the current product, a little of both. Something from one or the other that maybe a point that you want to drive home or we haven't discussed. The floor is yours right now.
I'll go ahead and do it. The due to the NXT movement, if you will, one of probably the biggest differences between Attitude Era now that we did not talk about is how much better the women's wrestling is. It's a lot better. Sometimes the matches might even be better than some of the matches that the guys are having for that particular pay-per-view. The women are actually wrestlers. Some of them are very attractive, but they're actually wrestlers no matter how they look, instead of back in the Attitude Era when they would go get real hot models that they would throw in the rings and call them wrestlers, and they'd wrestle for 4 minutes, slap each other a few times, and then someone would pin somebody. Now, I don't want to discredit every female wrestler from the Attitude Era because there were some good ones, but for the most part, overall, it's a lot better now than it was back then.
And once again, that top to bottom roster is better now.
Yeah. I think in NXT it's better, but I think on the main roster they don't give them enough time, so it becomes more of a joke. And part of that's because they're trying to promote the Diva show on the E, so they put in the people that are the less than technical female wrestlers, and they call them divas. Really, they need to get rid of that butterfly championship belt, go back to a woman's title, and let the good women wrestlers wrestle, and not just
again going back to my Stone Cold podcast. He talks to Dave Meltzer a lot, and he goes again, same thing you just said. And why not one of the and not a WrestleMania, not to be sexist, but why not one of these other pay-per-views? Let the women's championship be a headliner. Might not make as much money, but start putting credit into it.
They did that for NXT. They had a women's.
Again, NXT is a different.
No, I know, but I'm saying that's a pretty big deal. So if they can relate that to the major show, then go for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Hougie, how about you?
I was actually also going to hit on not the Divas so much, but NXT. NXT now is what Raw was 15 years ago. It's a bunch of really hungry, wrestlers who they really want to get on that main roster, and so when they had a couple of those NXT takeovers, and they were some of the best cards all year because they are literally they're almost like trying to please father, where they're going out there and just doing everything they possibly can. Because I don't know if they're just more loose about what they are allowed to do. And then when you're on the main show, it's like, okay, well, now that you're on, think of it like almost like in politics, where you have like, the guys that are trying to run for president at the beginning, like they're saying they're trying to be as impressive and as, as appealing and whatever to the crowd base. Then when they finally actually make it, then it's like, okay, you kind of have to fall in line with your job and the status quo, and be a good worker, at that point. And so then you kind of lose that edge that you had before, because Raw is a different product and brand than NXT is. So NXT gets to have that freedom to push the envelope a little bit more, because they're hungry. They really want to get there. And then when they get there, then you get some people like a Kevin Owens, who I think really does want to push it to that next level and, become one of the main guys. And you got like Wade Barrett, who, if he wasn't injured all the time, I think he would be at this point a main eventer. And so it's a shame, because Wade Barrett is probably one of my favorite wrestlers, even during the NXT time. So I've always enjoyed NXT. I wish that Raw would almost like take more from NXT, and once again, I don't know if that's cable television and USA and the backers and everybody else telling them that, look, NXT, you can do that, but on your flagship, you have to kind of mind your P's and Q's.
That, or it's Triple H is running NXT and knows what people want, knows how to run a good show, and Vince is still running Raw, and that's his
Do you think
baby.
Steph is more running Raw or Vince at
It's
this
Vince,
point?
and I don't even doubt it with any ounce of my being.
I was always just curious. Like, I know that a lot of people have said, like, as far as some of the wrestlers who have been doing shoot interviews, a lot of their complaints have been with Steph. So obviously, Steph is doing some things, and that a lot of people aren't huge fans of. And I think even Stone Cold in the podcast has said before that I think one of the problems with the product now is that there's not enough Vince and too much Steph.
Well, I think regardless of who they even say, Vince has the last say. I don't think anything.
Yeah, he's not going to fire his daughter. He's not.
Well, no.
If Steph has an idea, I think he'll run with it. As long as he doesn't think it's going to put the company under, which at this point, that's never going to happen. They're the only ticket in town. So it's do you make the show shitty just so you don't undermine your own daughter, who could potentially one day take over the business? So it's kind of like you're giving her the reins, the Roman reins, if you will, because 10 years from now, who knows? That dude might not be alive in 10 years, and then who takes over? It's probably going to be Steph and hopefully Triple H. And if Triple H is doing a good job at NXT, I would assume he should be doing a decent job with Raw. But I think his focus, obviously, is with the developmental stuff and the talent, the talent relations stuff. And then Stephanie is more of the brand and also just with Raw in general.
I think when the day comes and Vince is no longer running Raw, whether it's because he's no longer on this planet or because he just decided to finally retire, and I have a feeling it's going to be more the former than the latter, I do think it's going to be Triple H and Stephanie, and I think it's going to be a much more NXT run thing, and I think it's going to be a much better product because they're going to let things happen more organically. And they're going to, give a shot to whoever they think deserves a shot and let the stories with the fans' input sort of write themselves. But that's enough about the Attitude Era and the current product for now. And as we get ready for week 3 of the Wrestling Podcast, we're going to do some top lists. Normally we wait till the end of the month for that, but the end of the month is going to be the days before WrestleMania, so we're gonna do a WrestleMania preview show back then. So for Kyle Hoagland, Josh Haddix, I am Josh Kiser. From the birthplace of aviation to the birthplace of biotechnology. We'll see you guys next week.
you doing it? You swapped it. You confused me.
Have a good Friday, everybody.
See you later.